one of the most popular Christmas songs of all time almost didn't get recorded. It was written during World War II, and the lyricist, Kim Gannon, wrote it with the millions of soldiers and sailors who were stationed all around the globe in the back of his mind. It was originally rejected by various producers in the record industry because they felt it was too sad. It might bring down the servicemen and women and their families during the holiday season. But then Kim Gannon had a lucky break, and all because he played golf. One day, while out on the links with his friend Bing Crosby, he decided to try it on and see what the well-known crooner might think. Perhaps it was somewhere between the 9th and the 10th hole, when all of a sudden he burst into song. I'll be home for Christmas, you can plan on me, please have snow and mistletoe and presents on the tree. He even sang the line that producers thought was too sad. I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dreams. Crosby liked it. Crosby recorded it. And he put it on the flip side of White Christmas, released in October of 1943. It ended up being so popular that it stayed on the charts for 11 weeks, peaking at number 3. And then it returned to the charts the following year in 44, reaching as high as number 19. As the USO tours were made across Europe and the Pacific, it wasn't White Christmas that was requested time and time again. No, the most frequently requested song on those tours was I'll Be Home for Christmas. And it has remained a staple of the season ever since, even being requested by Frank Borman and James Lovell as they returned to Earth aboard the Gemini 7 spacecraft in December of 1965, giving a whole new meaning to the word home. The ancient Jews certainly understood that longing for home. In 587 BCE, their capital city of Jerusalem had been leveled by the conquering armies of Babylon. The temple, the very center, the heart of their religious life, had been destroyed. And thousands upon thousands of them had been taken into exile, forced to march 800 miles across the desert to live in Babylon. For decades, they had mourned the loss of their homeland. For decades, they had longed for a return to the comfortable, the familiar. Like the troops in the Pacific and Europe during World War II, they longed for home. And then it happened. In 538, there had been a shift. The Babylonians fell from power, and the new rulers had ordered that at least some of the Jews be allowed to go back, that they be allowed to return. And so they did. After all those years of hoping and dreaming, they finally got to make their way back across the desert to home, to Jerusalem. As you can imagine, it was a time of great rejoicing, a time of great joy. Songs of celebration must have filled the air as they anticipated their arrival. No doubt, familiar scenes from the homeland danced in their heads. But as the ancient city came into view, their joy was muted. For the city walls lay in ruins. The Temple Mount was bare. The sights they had imagined, the things they had envisioned in their dreams were no longer there. But then the prophet speaks up. From the smoke and rubble of destruction, he offers a word of hope. He offers a promise of redemption and restoration. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, he announces, to provide for those who mourn in Zion, to give them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastations of many generations. The homeland that they had envisioned, the home that had haunted their Babylonian dreams, that would be restored. That would be rebuilt. The walls would go up. The temple would once again stand proudly at the apex of the city. Their houses and shops and farms would be raised up from the ashes. But there's more. There's more. For this is not just a nostalgic return to the good old days before the exile. No, the restoration of Jerusalem serves a larger purpose. For the Lord, proclaims the prophet, the Lord loves justice. And the restoration of ancient Jerusalem is an example of that very justice. It is an example of that very justice writ large. Israel's captivity in Babylon, writes one scholar, was a travesty of justice. But the return of the Israelites, the return to Jerusalem, and the rebuilding that follows, that will demonstrate for one and all that God seeks to make things right. And in the end, as bleak as things may have seemed back then in the 6th century, as bleak as they sometimes seem today in the 21st century, justice shall prevail. Indeed, as William Brown writes, the restoration of Israel after the exile bears testimony to God's grace unleashed in the world. God's grace unleashed in the world. Troy Elliott was only 16 when his father died of tuberculosis. That's a very young age, 16, for taking on responsibility for a whole family, but that's what he did. He learned the craft of glazing glass and provided for his mother and his 2 younger brothers. And in later years, when his mother developed early onset Alzheimer's, he continued to care for her. He even found time to help out family members and friends and neighbors in San Carlos Park, right over in Fort Myers, as they coped with their problems. It was a challenging life, but Troy managed. That is, until 2 years ago, when one day he suffered a stroke in his own backyard. His mother, in her Alzheimer-induced confusion, didn't really know what to do. She tried to help him up off the ground, but then in the fog of confusion, she was at a loss. It wasn't sure what to do. For 3 days, he was unconscious and exposed to the elements. A neighbor finally found him there, and he was rushed to the hospital. It was almost 2.5 months later when he was finally released. But the stroke and the prolonged time on the ground had left him blind, suffering from short-term memory loss, very weak in the legs, hardly able to speak. His sister Veronica moved in to help care for Troy. She helped him through his therapy as he learned anew how to talk, how to walk. But it had been Troy who had always kept up the house itself. It was Troy who had done those little household repairs that keep a house functioning. And since he was unable to do that, things began to fall apart. Friends started to pitch in. They managed to fix a leaking roof. Troy's younger brother, an electrician from Ohio, came down to do some electrical work, new ceiling fans, smoke alarms, a few outlets. But it all proved quickly to be more than Troy's family and friends could manage on their own. And that's when Builders Care stepped in. Made up of subcontractors, electricians, plumbers, contractors, and carpenters, Builders Care provides free repair and remodeling help for folks who are disabled, for elderly folks who are poor and can't do it on their own. They ended up providing some $30,000 worth of work, new doors and cabinets, expanded room space, and perhaps most importantly, they replaced an old tub with a walk-in shower, a much safer way for blind Troy to wash up. They completed the work in just 8 days. The workers stayed late into the night and worked over the weekend, said the founder of Builders Care here in Lee County. Troy and Veronica moved back in just this past Friday. But before they did, they went to the assisted living where their mother now lives. There they made plans for her to come visit. We're going to bring her home for Christmas, said Veronica. Bring her home for Christmas. The restoration of a house in San Carlos Park may not be so grand as the return of the Israelites from exile and the rebuilding. It may not be as impressive as the erection of the temple and the construction of those ancient city walls, but new cabinets and walk-in showers also bear testimony to God's grace unleashed in the world. For that grace sometimes does come on a grand scale, but at other times it comes in ways so small that they might go unnoticed were we not paying attention. But always, however it comes, God's grace is all about coming home to that which is right and true and good. this Christmas, many of us here, maybe perhaps most of us, will indeed find ourselves at home, where we will be comforted by the familiar and the dear. But others will be far from home and longing for the reassurance that comes from being where you know you belong. Some will be without any home at all. Soldiers will still be in harm's way in places thousands and thousands of miles away. And there are other Troys who need a helping hand, who need a home rebuilt, the hungry, the homeless, the sick, the disabled. And around the world, there are millions of refugees who, like those ancient Israelites in Babylon, are far from homes that may not even exist anymore. This Christmas, might we remember those who long for home, and like the prophet of old, may we offer up words of encouragement. But then, let us do more. Like Troy and Veronica's friends and neighbors, like the carpenters and electricians and builders who cared, might we look for ways that we can be agents for the unleashing of God's grace in the world, so that one day, one beautiful day, all might be home for Christmas. Amen. Sisters and brothers, this is a time of year when we think a lot about giving. We think a lot about helping other people. But that's something that needs to go on year-round. That's something that needs to happen every single day. We need to be agents, unleashing God's grace in the world. If you're not sure how you can do that, if you need suggestions, just speak to me or speak to Deb. We've got lots of ideas for you. If you're already doing it, may God bless your efforts. And might we all work for that time when all are able to be home for Christmas. And not just in